I've come to meet historian David Charnick, who's going to tell me all about Whitechapel's murky and often dangerous past. Well, David, it's good to see you again. And I know you're a knowledgeable tour guide for this area as well as other areas of London. We're sitting here in the council chamber of the Town Hall Hotel, which was formerly, I believe, Bethnal Green Town Hall.
That's correct.
I have lived 5 minutes away from here, but I don't know that much about the area. What can you tell me?
Everything starts to change really in the 1700s. Before then, it's a very rural area. It's a hamlet, and just down the road, a grocer of the city, John Kirby, he had his country house built at Bethnal Green in 1570. Like a lot of people, these big houses appeared close to the city, but in open areas, so courtiers, merchants, that kind of thing, would have their country places here. It all starts to change really in the 1700s when the silk weaving industry comes into the area. In the 1680s, a lot of Protestants fled France because of persecutions from the Catholic government, and the weavers settled on the edges of the city, and that very soon became Bethnal Green's trade. And then it got taken over really by furniture making. Cabinet making, joinery, that kind of thing. That became the dominant industry in Bethnal Green in the mid to late 1800s, really because of the Regent's Canal bringing the timber up from the riverside sawmills. There was a huge growth in the early 1800s. London was expanding to become the great metropolis at the heart of possibly the most extensive empire we've ever known. And with the growth of the docks, with the growth of trade and light industry, it attracted people like a magnet. And suddenly what was a semi-rural hamlet was now a suburb of a thriving city, and very overcrowded and consequently very insanitary as well, with lots of problems that caused. Well, the area has seen a lot of change in the last few decades, but it's an area that's seeing a lot of regrowth and regeneration in the last few years. It's becoming quite a tourist attraction, really. People are coming to Bethnal Green to experience its character and its sort of atmosphere and its diversity too. There's such a mix of if you like, old school London, the sort of fish and chips, pie and mash type London, along with the various traces of immigrant communities over time, and the fairly recent hipster culture that's been coming in and bringing in with it a lot of affluence and new approaches and so on.
Now, the East End has a reputation for being grimy and grubby. I think that's starting to disappear, isn't it?
The dirty East End, that really is sort of mid to late 19th century when the term the East End actually comes into being in the 1880s, and that's the East End of Jack the Ripper, it's the East End of cholera and typhus and things like this, and private burial grounds being choked up with burials. Whereas in the 20th century there were great advances, and there's been a lot of investment by local authority and businesses as well, which has brought the area into a much better and much more comfortable situation.
One of the other things about the East End that everybody knows is the word Cockney. Mm-hmm. What's the true definition of a Cockney?
Well, the first thing you've got to remember is a Cockney is not an East Ender. A Cockney is a Londoner. And the traditional story is that you have to be born within the sound of Bow Bells. Now, some people think that means Bow Church, which is down on the eastern side of the borough, but it's actually St Mary le Bow in Cheapside in the city. And the bell there was used as the curfew bell. So when the city gates were going to close back in medieval times, they'd ring the bell, so anyone working in the fields would come in. So the sound of the bell had to carry far over the fields. And if you go back to pre-industrial times, I've been told that you could hear the bells from Highgate and Hampstead. It carried very far. So that's the traditional meaning of the word Cockney, but it does tend to get a bit misused as being exclusively East Enders. There's a great deal to see in the East End that gets neglected, to be honest.
I believe there's a tree there that's causing some consternation.
Yeah, it's a mulberry tree that's supposed to be many centuries old. The thing about silk weaving coming into England and specifically to London, there were attempts made actually to grow mulberry trees in England for the silkworms, because you get the silk from the cocoon that the grub lives in, but it never really took off. So there are occasional little mulberry trees here and there which are of huge historic significance.
I've noticed a war memorial in Cypress Street.
After the First World War, that's where you get the war memorials coming in. I mean, there was a huge emphasis on the cost of the First World War in the hopes that people would remember it and wouldn't repeat the mistake. And so you get the big war memorials, but also a lot of streets lost a number of their inhabitants, their husbands, fathers, and also sons. So yeah, you get a number of these little local ones, and they're a reminder of just how great the human cost of war actually was. You need to take the time and just look at these things and think, yeah, actually, there's a lot of work gone into that. It's well worth looking at. And of course, they all have stories behind them.